Love goes where love is. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when Mara first felt the weight of it. She didn't know then, of course, that her life was about to be forever altered. She had been walking the same cobblestone streets of her small town, Carrington, for as long as she could remember, the scent of freshly fallen leaves mingling with the distant aroma of coffee brewing in the windows of the cafe she passed every day. Nothing felt out of the ordinary as she walked past the familiar shops, their brightly colored signs welcoming her, though they had done so countless times before. But something about today felt different. Maybe it was the way the sunlight filtered through the golden trees, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. Maybe it was the way the world seemed to hum with the quiet, steady pulse of nature's rhythm. Or maybe, just maybe, it was because Mara had recently made a choice that, unbeknownst to her, would change the course of her life forever. She had decided to take a different path. This wasn't something drastic. No, it wasn't as though she was abandoning her job at the small bookstore or leaving her family behind. But Mara had been, for the longest time, floating in the safe spaces of her own life, never venturing far beyond the walls she had built for herself. A quiet woman with quiet dreams, she had learned to hold her desires close to her chest, afraid of what might happen if she let them slip out into the world. But today, something stirred inside her, and she felt it was time to take that first step into something unknown. She had left the bookstore early, feeling restless, and decided to take a walk in the park at the edge of town. It wasn't far, just a few blocks away, but the park was a place of solace she often found herself returning to when the weight of everything seemed too much to bear. It was there, beneath the boughs of the tall oak tree, that she saw him. His name was Julian, a man she had seen around town on a few occasions. He wasn't from Carrington, she knew that much. He had only moved here a few months ago, seeking a quieter life after years of working as a freelance photographer in the bustling city. Julian had settled into a small apartment near the park, and Mara often caught glimpses of him while passing by. He had a way of walking, a purposeful stride that seemed to draw attention without meaning to. That day, he was sitting on the park bench beneath her oak tree, camera in hand, his eyes focused on the world around him. She could see the way his gaze lingered on the colors of the leaves, the light shifting across the landscape, capturing the beauty of the moment through his lens. Mara felt an unexpected pull, a magnetic force that seemed to draw her toward him. Her feet moved almost of their own accord, and before she knew it, she was standing in front of him, her heart beating faster than she cared to admit. Julian looked up, his gaze meeting hers, and there was a moment, a brief, fleeting moment, when it felt as though time had stopped. His eyes were warm, kind, yet there was something deeper there, something that made Mara feel as though he had seen the world in a way that no one else had. His lips curved into a gentle smile. "Hi," he said, his voice a quiet baritone that seemed to resonate with the silence around them. "Hi," Mara replied, her words coming out softer than she intended. She felt the heat rise in her cheeks and quickly looked away. She wasn't used to this, the feeling of someone looking at her with such interest. She wasn't used to being the one caught in someone else's gaze. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" Julian said, breaking the silence between them. Mara nodded, though she couldn't quite bring herself to speak. She wasn't shy, not exactly, but there was something about him that made her feel self-conscious in a way she didn't understand. "I'm Julian," he said, extending a hand. "I've seen you around town." Mara hesitated, unsure if she should take the offered hand, but then she did. His touch was warm, firm, and for a moment, it felt as though the whole world had fallen away. "Mara," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Nice to meet you, Mara," Julian said with a smile that reached his eyes. They stood there for a moment, an awkward silence stretching between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was as though they were both waiting for something to happen, for something to shift. Mara didn't know what it was, but she could feel it, the pull between them, the unspoken connection. "Would you like to sit down?" Julian asked after a moment, gesturing to the empty space beside him on the bench. Mara hesitated but then nodded. She sat down, keeping a slight distance between them, though the space felt insignificant. It was strange, this sense of familiarity, as though she had known him for far longer than she actually had. They sat in silence for a while, watching the leaves fall around them, the quiet sound of birds chirping filling the air. Julian had his camera with him, but he didn't seem to be in any hurry to take pictures. Instead, he simply watched the world unfold around them, as if savoring the moment. "I'm not from here," Julian said eventually, breaking the stillness. "I came here looking for something quieter, something real." Mara turned to look at him, intrigued. "And have you found it?" Julian paused for a moment, as though considering the question. "I think so," he said, his voice soft but certain. "But I wasn't expecting to find this." He gestured to the space between them, to the quiet connection they had already begun to build. Mara's heart skipped a beat, and she quickly looked away, unsure how to respond. She had always been careful with her heart, always guarded, always afraid of what might happen if she allowed herself to feel too much. "I don't know what I'm doing here," she said, almost to herself. "You're here," Julian replied, his voice calm. "That's enough for now." She met his gaze again, this time with more certainty. There was something in his eyes that made her believe him, made her believe that everything she had been afraid of, everything she had been holding back, didn't matter. In this moment, nothing mattered but the two of them, sitting together beneath the oak tree. And in that moment, Mara realized something important: love wasn't something that could be planned or predicted. It wasn't something you could chase or force. Love went where love was allowed to grow, where it was nurtured and embraced, where it was welcomed without fear. Mara didn't know it then, but she had just taken the first step into something that would change her life in ways she couldn't yet imagine. It wasn't a grand gesture, nor a dramatic declaration. It was something quieter, something subtler, the beginning of something real. As the afternoon waned and the sky shifted into shades of orange and pink, Mara and Julian sat together, sharing stories, laughing over small, silly things, and slowly, gently, beginning to open up to each other. Neither of them knew where it would go, but neither of them cared. They were content, for now, to simply be in this moment. And for Mara, that was enough.